Do you have the right stuff? Then blast off to Janet's Planet Virtual Astronaut Academy. Learn from real astronauts, real pilots, real space experts, and real engineers. Welcome to Janet's Planet, where we're traveling at the speed of thought.
Hello and welcome to Space Matters. Today, we will be speaking with my friend Les Johnson. He is an author, a physicist, and a NASA technologist. And we cover a wonderful array of topics, including Interstellar, books he's recently authored, and his work at NASA.
Status check to proceed with terminal count. First stage system. Propulsion. Go. Hydraulics. Go. Locks. Go. LH2. Go. Vehicle system engineer. Go. Anomaly chief. Go. Range coordinator. Clear to proceed. Launch director. You have permission to launch.
We have liftoff of the United Launch Alliance.
Liftoff of the United Launch Alliance Delta IV rocket.
And we have good indication of separation.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us at Space Matters. And today we have Mr. Les Johnson with us. Les, can you please tell us more about what you do?
Wow, what I do. I wear many hats, as Rhonda is very aware. I'm a physicist by education, but I work more in the technology fields in my day job. I do write popular science and science fiction books. I'm also a founding member of the Interstellar Research Group. I serve as their technical advisor and the program chairman for their symposia. So I'm pretty active in advocating for future interstellar travel, which is how I got to know you through our connections on interstellar kinds of things. And then in my day job, which I have to keep separate from those other two things because those are purely my hobbies and things I do on my own time, I do work for NASA at the Marshall Space Flight Center, where I am really honored to serve as the principal investigator for NASA's two future interplanetary solar sail missions, one of which is slated to launch this fall and the next one in early 2025.
So you're not busy?
No. just ask my family. I'm happiest when I'm busiest. I think I would be unbearable around the house if I had too much free time on my hands.
Well, what I really want to do is jump right to the NASA stuff, but I'm going to exercise a semblance of self-control and ask that you tell us more about your involvement with IRG and what that means.
Well, the Interstellar Research Group used to be called the Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop. And it really is an outgrowth of the excitement that happened with all things interstellar probably about 10 years ago, a little bit less than 10 years ago, when DARPA had their 100-year Starship competition, and they selected Mae Jemison's group, 100-year Starship, to be the winner of that. And they had the kickoff of people actually seriously talking about going to the stars. I had been working in the field for years, actually, including as part of my day job. Back in the early 2000s, I had probably the coolest job title in the universe, and that was manager of NASA's Interstellar Propulsion Technology Research Project, which was a very short-lived project, and it was not funding research to go to Alpha Centauri. It was looking at funding missions to go out to like 500 astronomical units, so into interstellar space. So when this whole 100-year Starship thing got excited, I had been looking into it. I'd been active in the field, very curious about it. And that national organization was formed. And here in the Tennessee Valley, there's a confluence that people don't realize unless you're really from this area, a confluence of extreme engineering and science talent. If you look at the headwaters of the Tennessee River up near Oak Ridge and Knoxville, you have the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which is where they built the fuel for the atomic bomb during World War II, big nuclear research industry there. Goes through Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is where the Tennessee Valley Authority and all the electrical engineering that keeps the power grid on in the Southeast is located. And then comes through Huntsville, which is where the Marshall Space Flight Center is, and where all of NASA's rocketry work is pretty much led. So we got together and formed our own organization as a regional group to promote and advocate interstellar travel. And it has just grown. It's international now in scope, soon to be issuing memberships. And we're having our next symposium, which is open to anybody. Anyone should attend. It's not a super technical event. It has technical components, but we believe going to the stars will include everyone. And that meeting will be in Tucson this September. You can learn more about that by going to the group's website, irg.space, and checking out the symposium. We'd love to have you. It's a lot of fun, and you might learn a lot along the way. So that's my my monologue about Interstellar.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And because of the things that you're involved in, you've had the unique experience of really being able to see progress with regards to taking our approach to interstellar seriously. It seemed to be a very long conversation to finally start putting forth some efforts to get there. And so compared to where we were about 10 years ago to where we are today, 500 AU doesn't look nearly as far as it used to. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. If you look back on the history of the field, which predates my involvement pretty dramatically, the heyday beginnings of it were right behind the beginnings of the space age. The space age began in the late 50s, ran through the 60s, and that was when all the hoopla was out there. But it was in the 70s that people like Dr. Robert Forward and Greg Matloff and others started seriously looking at methods of how we might go to the stars with real science. Okay, no offense to my colleagues who come up with these really creative, novel ways to look at the laws of physics that may or may not exist. We could have our understanding of the universe upended next week and get warp drive. That'd be great, but we don't think it's real right now based on what we know about physics. And as a consequence, if you look at what we really can do, there are still ways we can get to the stars, but they all involve thinking really, really big, right? Really large scale kinds of things. And 20 years ago, when I was first getting involved in this, I read every book I could find. I was fortunate to get to meet and actually work with the late Dr. Robert Forward. If you go and look at the early literature on this field, he's the author of about a third of the ideas that we're still pursuing today, right, for going to the stars. Got to work with Greg Matloff and others. And so it was really kind of frustrating, though, because when I was managing that project and looking at the state of the field, Rhonda, there was essentially no progress being made. Nothing had been done. It was the year 2001, and it could have been the year 1971, right? I mean, there was really very little progress happening. So that morphed into another project that I led that let us start working on things like solar sails. Then you had these innovations coming out of around the world, like Dr. Pekka Janhunen's electric sail, which is a way to harness the energy of the solar wind. You started getting serious research groups funding work into compact fusion to actually get a realistic fusion power source, which you would need to drive an interstellar vehicle. And all indications are that in the next few years, we might actually see fusion power. It may not be 30 years away forever. The joke is fusion's 30 years away. It always will be, right? But let's hope not. It's looking more optimistic that we might have that happen. And so in the area of sails, beamed energy sails, which are ways we can talk about going to the stars, there's been tremendous progress made. I could go on forever about sailing and solar sailing, but just to give you an example, I put together in my day job, and I have to put on my NASA hat here briefly. 20 years ago, being a good NASA bureaucrat and project manager, I put together a roadmap, a plan of how we would get from where we were, which was essentially nothing, to how we would get to kilometer scale solar sails that we might need to go to the stars. And in that 20 years, we've built and flown the first couple of increments on that roadmap. Not as fast as I'd hoped, but it's happened. And the projects I'm working on now will get us the next couple of steps. But what was interesting to me that I like to ruminate on is when we started, this kilometer scale sails that would have to weigh less than a raisin per square meter and have to be a fraction of the thickness of those of you who still have hair, the thickness of your hair, that material didn't exist. There was no material that would do that. So you would call it unobtainium because it just didn't exist. but it was discovered in 2004 with graphene.
Right.
And now it does exist. So we don't know how to make it that big, but the materials exist. And a similar story can be made to the lasers. I'm sorry, I'm going on at length, Rhonda, not giving you a chance to say.
No, yes, this is exactly why we want you here to have this conversation. We don't get to see this very often.
Well, I'm excited. So when I started working, even before the interstellar work, I worked back early in my career on something called the Strategic Defense Initiative. That was right after I got out of graduate school with my degree in physics. And for those younger viewers, that was a program that began during what was called the Cold War, when this country called the Soviet Union existed. And we thought we were all going to go to nuclear war with each other. And President Reagan was trying to develop technologies that could defend against missiles that were armed with nuclear weapons. And one of the technologies that they were interested in fielding were high power lasers in space. But to get lasers of the power level that we routinely build today out of solid state systems with essentially fiber optics and light emitting diodes, right, which are pretty standard in everything from your compact disc player to otherwise, you just scale those up today, those didn't exist. Right. And so to have lasers of the power that we now have being tested on the back of a truck across town here in Redstone for theater defense for troops against mortars, they zap the mortars coming in. You would have had to have had a building the size of a warehouse with rocket engines using hydrogen fluoride gas, which is, by the way, extremely toxic and corrosive, to get the lasing to produce a power sufficient to do the laser beaming that's now done by plugging into a diesel generator on the back of a truck. So, you know, the technology is just advancing rapidly. We're nowhere near at the scale we need to go to the stars, but we've made astonishing progress in the last 30 years, just astonishing. Anyway, that's the 76.
That was the question, and I agree with that. Right, and there have been times where I've made comments or I've expressed my interest in certain approaches, and I can see you're over there biting your lip. But one of the things that does become more apparent is that we're not so dependent on leapfrog technologies anymore. We are getting closer just with the technology that we have available today to do those things. Would you agree with that?
I think we're getting closer to mounting the Precursor missions. I think I really admire what the folks at the Breakthrough Starshot are doing, where they're trying to use extremely high power lasers and small sails and get beamed energy to 10 or 20% the speed of light. I really think that's still pretty far away. I think it's physically possible, but the technologies aren't close. However, you mentioned 500 astronomical units. That might as well have been Alpha Centauri when I started working on these technologies, right? And today, I don't think that's far-fetched. I think with the big rockets that we have, whether it be the Space Launch System or what Elon Musk is developing, and combine that with some of these solar sails or maybe early beamed energy sails, or even if some of these fusion systems get online soon, we could see, not necessarily in my career, but hopefully while I'm still walking the Earth, right? We actually could see a mission being launched to 500 astronomical units or beyond, which is amazing.
So I agree with you. I do believe that we are edging closer, or at least, as you know, that is my continued hope. But with that, can you walk us through the steps of what the incremental steps are from, what we're doing on orbit to cislunar to throughout the solar system, and then on to Alpha Centauri or other interstellar destination? In your mind, what do those incremental steps look like? What steps should be taken, and what do you believe to be the most viable?
Okay, well, I'm going to be generic at first on that question, because I think that I can give you, on my hand, I can count off, if I can get my hand in the picture, right? I can count off the different methods you might use. One is solar and beamed energy sails, right? Mm-hmm. Another would be an antimatter propulsion system, which I really consider to be the ultimate propulsion system for an interstellar craft. Antimatter annihilation is the most efficient battery that nature has provided us, and it's real. We know how to do it. Nature does it all the time. We just don't know how to create antimatter in sufficient quantity and store it and control it. Nuclear fusion is certainly an option. I think Project Orion, if you set aside concerns about destroying the biosphere by setting off nuclear weapons on the ground to propel your spacecraft, is certainly physically possible, right? So nature has given us some ways to do this, but they all have something in common. And that something in common is you've got to think big. I mean, like really big. You have to think about solar sails that are kilometer scale, multi-kilometer scale, or lasers that have the output power of the U.S. power grid, right? Focused on one sail. Or you have to be thinking about a fusion power source, but even with that power source, it takes fuel. Mm-hmm. And the fuel to do a fusion-driven starship is going to make a Saturn V look like a fuel tank, right. One of many that would be required for that vessel. And even antimatter, which, a gram here and a gram there is more powerful than a nuclear weapon, but we're talking about having to have tons of antimatter to go to the stars. So when you put all that together, you have to think big, and we can't do that on the ground. So I think in terms of what it means, my opinion is, and I don't mean this in a environmentally insensitive way. I mean this very seriously. I think we have to be masters of our solar system. We have to be able to have the capability to move asteroids and mine them, to get the resources. We have to have the ability to have really large solar-powered construction facilities, perhaps in deep space, maybe mining the moon with mass drivers to get some of the raw materials out into space that we need. Because I think a lot of these systems, in fact, almost all of them, if we're going to make this work, will have to either be assembled or have components that are really, really big and will be in space. So everything we do to expand that cislunar infrastructure is really a step toward going to Alpha Centauri, in my opinion.
So on that thread, are you suggesting that in order for us to be successful in our next steps to interstellar, we have to grow a cislunar infrastructure and economy in order for that to be successful, or in order to get there?
I have to be real careful. If you say you have to do it, no, I think creative people might find a way that you don't have to do it. To my personal opinion, I think it is the most credible path forward. Because once you have that infrastructure and you're used to living and working out there and making things out there, it'll be easier to start doing some of these things, like taking that solar power plant that you've built and using some of that energy to make and store antimatter where it's not a risk for some kind of accidental annihilation on Earth that just happens to take out a major city or something, right? So I think it'll be easier to do a lot of these things once that infrastructure is in place. I think if you wanted to mount it strictly launching everything from the Earth, you probably still could, but it would be really expensive, really difficult, and probably not as easy to field, in my opinion. But I'm willing to have somebody prove me wrong.
Sure. No. So with that, one of the things that I have encountered frequently in my interstellar conversations is the belief that when we start talking about sails and sailing, that everything slows down and everything becomes farther away and harder to get to. Is that the case, or is that completely the opposite?
I think it's completely the opposite. I think if you look at the ideas I've just spouted off about going to the stars, if you want to go beyond Alpha Centauri and you want to get out to stars that are 10 light years away or more and beyond just the immediate neighborhood, you can no longer consider fusion. It doesn't have the energy density you need to get the trip times down, or even the propellant you need to have a reasonable trip time. So throw it out, just throw it out. You can also throw out Orion. That's not going to do you any good for beyond Alpha Centauri. Trip times are too long. Throw it out. You start driving up your antimatter requirements to be really, really big, and that leaves sails and laser-driven sails. It doesn't leave a lot of things on the table for beyond the nearest star systems. And the nice thing about the laser systems is they're scalable. And to continue boosting out in the solar system, you could have additional laser boost stations along the way, right? To pick up the beaming, maybe one around Jupiter, maybe one out at 500 AU. So when you go flying by, you continue to get boosted. And that could be antimatter powered or fusion powered driving the lasers out there. So you could conceivably see an infrastructure that takes you all the way to Barnard's star or beyond, in my opinion. I don't think the other systems scale so well. They just don't. So it's in my opinion, that's not a good argument. And I think people think sails are slow because the sails that we'll be flying in the near term are large, cumbersome, and slow.
Mm-hmm. No,
but that doesn't mean they have to be. It just means they will be as we take these baby steps to get to where we need to be for an interstellar mission.
well, and that's the perfect segue to tell us a little bit more about what you do at NASA Marshall.
Okay, well, let me take off my interstellar hat, right, and put on my. I should get real hats. I think I'll do that for
Good.
when we return to meeting in person. I'll have 3 hats. I can take them off and on. I mentioned this roadmap that we developed, and I was privileged to be involved and to be involved in the first flight of NASA's first solar sail, which a lot of people may not be familiar with. It was called NanoSail D, and we flew that in 2010 in Earth orbit. It was a 10 square meter sail, pretty small. The thickness was 2.5 microns, about the thickness of a hair, right? Very reflective. The material, I've got a sample. Rhonda, I'm one of the few people that when I go to a conference, I keep solar sail material in my pocket.
You do?
I don't have a pocket protector with a pen, but I've got my handy dandy solar sail material. And you can see it's pretty lightweight and pretty resilient, right? I mean, you can tear it if you try, but it's pretty robust. So we flew that in 2010, and the Planetary Society saw that and liked our design and worked with us, and they took it and improved it. And they flew the Light Sail 1 and 2. A and B, they've changed names. It's back to 1 and 2 now, I think, which were 32 square meters in 2015 and 2019. Very successful missions, advanced the state of the art. And while they were working on that, my team at NASA was working on the Near-Earth Asteroid Scout mission, which will launch, as of now, we're supposed to launch in 2021, late this year in November. We just finished integrating the spacecraft. But that'll be a sail that is just shy of 1,000 square feet. And it's the same material. And it's in what's called a 6U CubeSat, which is about the size of a boot box. Okay, and let me get a sample here. I want to show you. This is. Oh, I'm all blurry now. Let me get back into focus. Hopefully, it'll refocus. Yeah, here we go. This is the boom that we have. We have 4 of these that are about 21 feet long, and these are triangular shaped. And you can see that they fold over and they roll up and they coil. And so we have 4 of these coiled into our spacecraft, and there's a motor that allows them to uncoil. And when they do, they get rigid. And these booms are straight and they go out about over 20 feet. When these are unfurling, they'll pull the sail out with it until we get about 1,000 square feet. It's about 900 and some square feet of sail. And the rocket will take us into space, and it'll kick us off around the moon, near the moon, and we'll fly by the moon and then take a 2-year cruise to an asteroid. And we have a camera on board provided by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory that'll be used to image and study an asteroid. That's why we're called NEA Scout, Near Earth Asteroid Scout. I'm the PI, the solar sail lead for that. So we're real excited. The spacecraft's all put together, ready to go. It'll be shipped down to the Kennedy Space Center soon. And we're getting ready for mission operations, which will be run here in Huntsville at the Huntsville Operations Center. And if I'm not mistaken, it'll be the first interplanetary mission that we've run from NASA Marshall. So that's pretty cool. And then last December, another team that I lead, we have just competed a pretty grueling competition for funding from NASA's Science Mission Directorate for something called Solar Cruiser. Now, Solar Cruiser is not about 1,000 square feet. It's about 18,000 square feet. So the next time you go to Home Depot, it's a sizable fraction of the floor area of a Home Depot store, right? And so those booms aren't this little thin triangular shaped boom here. By golly, it's a big boom. And these are composite, so it's much lighter weight. Right. And it coils up just the same. It has the same look to it. But these booms are essentially 100 feet long, and we have 4 of those coiled into the spacecraft. And the same sail material, but it'd be 18,000 square feet of it. So that sail is going to take a small spacecraft, and it's going to fly toward the Earth-Sun Lagrange point, L1, and we're going to go sunward of L1 and use the constant thrust of the sail for the sail to remain on the Earth-Sun line as both orbit the sun, even though we're different distance, which means ordinarily we'd be different orbits, and the orbit, they wouldn't stay together. But by thrusting all the time, the sun will keep the sunlight pressure on the sail will keep the sail between the Earth and the sun. And we'll be demonstrating this for use by scientists who then want to go do science missions. And to take that back to my roadmap, this roadmap started out saying, you know, first we need to fly a 10 square meter sail, then a 100 square meter sail, and then 1,000 square meter sail. You see the theme here. And then after 1,000 square meters, we need to know how to build a 10,000 square meter, and then 100,000 square meter. And then once you know how to do that, you're only a factor of 10 or one more step away from this square kilometer, which is what we need for interstellar travel. Well, I'm pleased to report that we did the 10 square meters with NanoSail D. Near Earth Asteroid Scout is almost 100 square meters. Solar Cruiser is almost 2,000 square meters. So there's the 1,000 square meter, and it is scalable in design up to 10,000 square meters. So there we are. And I have every confidence that that's going to continue. And as we fly Solar Cruiser, we will figured out how to build one that's 100,000 square meters, which will only keep us one step away from our interstellar class sail. So I'm excited. We're making progress.
So in a nutshell, you're very, very busy at Marshall. And one of the things that I also wanted to let everybody know about are all of the books that you've written. I mean, you're quite a prolific author. You write nonfiction and fiction. Can you tell us a little bit more about your books and your activities as an author?
Sure, I'll be glad to do that. And this is where I change hats again. So I've got to take off my NASA hat because I strictly do this outside of my NASA activities. I've averaged about a book a year, whether that be writing a whole book, co-authoring a book, or editing an anthology, which has different things in it. And I really enjoy it. I go back to my undergraduate education. I have a BA, and I really love the liberal arts. And I enjoyed reading the classics. I've been a reader ever since I can remember. I read a lot of science fiction when I was young. It's one of it, and watching when I was 7 years old, watching Neil Armstrong walk on the moon is combining that with Captain Kirk, and you understand why I studied physics and said I want to work for NASA. Right? There's nothing unique there. There are a lot of us who had that inspiration. I've just been one of the lucky few to be able to do it. And starting, I don't know, 13 years ago or so, I wrote a nonfiction book with my good friend and colleague, Greg Matloff, who I mentioned previously, called Living Off the Land in Space. He was the lead author because he had published before, and I wrote with him. And that was for Springer Books, a nonfiction book about how we might live off the land in the solar system. And that led to other books because the publishers liked my writing. I wrote a book on solar sails with Greg Matloff and one of the leaders in the field, a European, a guy from Italy named Giovanni Volpetti. And that book was actually reviewed in a 2-page review in the journal Nature, which was way cool. My technical work hasn't made Nature, but my pop science book did. Then I started writing science fiction. I've written a couple of novels with my friend and colleague, Travis Taylor, who is a great writer. I've written a book called Rescue Mode with the great Ben Bova, who recently passed, one of the casualties of COVID, unfortunately, last year. It's a Mars exploration book that I learned a lot about writing from Ben. But the books I'm most proud of that have come out all came out at the same time in 2018. And in fact, these two books came out on the same day from two different no, not these books. Yeah, here we go. These. Sorry, I wasn't as prepared as I wanted to be right there. A nonfiction book about graphene, the material that you talked about earlier that I mentioned is something we could build these big sails out of. And that book grew out of my interest in solar sails. I read a technical paper about the feasibility of building these kilometer scale sails from graphene, and that got me interested in graphene. I mentioned that to my book agent. I have a literary agent, and she goes, "That would be a great popular science book. Why don't you write one?" So we put together a proposal with my interstellar colleague, Dr. Joe Meany, who had just gotten his PhD in material science related work, nanotech, from the University of Alabama. And so we wrote a proposal to Prometheus Books, and they bought it, and the book has done very well. It's featured by the Graphene Association of America, and was also reviewed in Nature, and has done really well. It was a lot of fun to put together and speculate what this great material can do. And it turns out on the same day, from a different publisher, my science fiction novel, Mission to Methone, which I'm the most proud of the books I've had published so far, is a novel of first contact. And it's a space adventure story set in the near future, where shock of shocks, a company that mines asteroids and does surveying of those asteroids with a solar sail-propelled small spacecraft, finds an asteroid they're going to survey. And when they get up to the asteroid, they realize this isn't an asteroid. This is an old spaceship. And it's about 30,000-year-old spaceship. And then the story picks up from there and eventually takes us to a first contact situation. So I had a lot of fun writing that, and that's been my best-selling book.
Now, will there be a sequel to that one?
No, I'm not writing a sequel to that, but I do have 2 new novels coming out this year. There is a first book of a 3-book series that Travis and I are writing. It's about interstellar travel. The book is coming out in hardcover in August from Baen Books. I'm real pleased they decided to do a hardcover edition. That means they like it. And it's called Saving Proxima. It's available for pre-order right now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. It'll be in hardcover as well as ebook, and shortly after that, there'll be an audiobook. We expect to have the second book of the series released at about the same time next year, and then a year after that. It'll take us about a year to write each book. And we're well into the second book right now. And then I have another novel written by me, which is also the first book of a series, called The Spacetime War, which will come out in October. And it's my first step into space opera. And space opera is still hard science, but it's got more grand themes. 2001: A Space Odyssey is hard science fiction. Star Wars is a space opera, grand theme, good versus evil, that kind of thing. Well, the Spacetime War is dipping my toes into space opera.
I look forward to that.
And then I would be remiss if I didn't also mention, because of the interstellar connection and talking about going back to the beginning, I just submitted to Princeton University Press the manuscript for another nonfiction book, which will come out in 2022, called The Traveler's Guide to the Stars, and is a popular science nonfiction book all about our favorite topic, interstellar travel, from the why and the how to how we might do it, and some of the ethical issues and all that. It's not a technical book at all. It's meant to be read by a general audience. And I'm thrilled. It's my first book from Princeton Press. And I'm real excited because that'll be out in 2022.
Where do you have time? How do you have time for all of these things?
Well, COVID's actually helped. I'm one of those people that has decided if I don't have to go back to the office very much, I'll be fine with that. And the reason for that is my commute time has gone to zero, right? You get up, all I have to say is I now have an hour and a half in the mornings to write that I never had before, every day. Where I would have been spent getting ready for work, packing my lunch, sitting in the car to get through the gate, to get into work by 8 o'clock in an 8 o'clock meeting. Whereas now I can get up at the same time and write for an hour to an hour and a half, still grab my breakfast and be in time for the 8 o'clock meeting. So I'll tell you, first and foremost, it's this whole COVID stay-at-home thing. I've been just as productive with my NASA work, and I suddenly don't have a 40-minute commute in the afternoon, so I'm earlier to dinner. It's been kind of nice to be home. Now, it's been a real tragedy for all the losses we've had and all the businesses that have been lost. But I'll tell you, from a point of view of somebody who's working at home, I don't think I'm alone in saying that I don't know if I want to go back to the office all the time. I mean, it's kind of nice having zero commute, quite frankly. Now, there are days I have to go in because we're building hardware for a flight project, right? But I would say 3 days a week I plan on working from home. So
this is definitely been a case study on proof of work. That's for sure. So, wow, you are so involved, and everything that you have is that you're involved in is so wonderfully interconnected. There was one question that I wanted to ask you before, and it passed too quickly. With IRG, I have seen that they were promoting a scholarship recently. Maybe it's about 6 months old now, but I wanted to follow up on that. And even if the application deadline for the current scholarship is closed, I don't know if it has or not. I do want to put the word out that there may be an opportunity there in the future.
Absolutely. The Interstellar Research Group is a nonprofit educational organization. Donations are welcome. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. And thanks to some generous sponsors, one of which is my science fiction publisher, Baen Books. The IRG gives out at least 3 scholarships every year to undergraduate and graduate students who are pursuing a field that is related to interstellar travel. That can be engineering, it can be science, it could be creative writing for writing science essays about the future, etc. And it's open every year. I forgot exactly what month it opens up. This current year has already passed and the winners were announced, but there'll be a new announcement probably in the early fall for the next year. It's a competitive scholarship announcement. You can find out about it through the IRG website. It's also listed on these scholarship aggregation sites. I had 2 kids that went to college less than 10 years ago, so we got used to scouring all the websites for scholarships. And basically, students just have to write an essay. And it's a competitively evaluated essay. And the winners, no strings attached, get checks for $2,500. And one of the scholarships is the Richard Bolgio Memorial Scholarship. And Richard, or as those of us who were close to him called him Uncle Timmy, was the founder of a science fiction convention in Chattanooga called LibertyCon, which a lot of us that are involved in the IRG attend every year. And in fact, we have board meetings sometimes at LibertyCon. And it's named in his honor because he was a nuclear engineer and a big proponent of technology in space and space exploration. And what better way to honor someone like that than to name an interstellar scholarship after them. So we're real thrilled with that.
Well, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Les Johnson, for your time today. I really value your time and look forward to more conversations like this.
I'm afraid it was more of a monologue. I think I talked 90% of the time. Sorry about that.
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate it today.
Well, thanks for having me, Rhonda. Space does matter.
Space does matter. Right. As I had said, Les Johnson is one of my favorite people, and he's a good friend. Thank you, Les, for your time and your insight today.